Welcome to the Made for More Parenting Podcast, a production of Immanuel Schools and Summit Ministries.
We have a very special guest and one that's familiar to everyone. I almost hate to ask, why are we interviewing Ryan Wood? But I'm going to just go ahead and ask so you can tell us a little bit about how he came about being on the podcast.
Yeah, well, obviously everybody knows Ryan, or maybe they call him Mr. Wood, as the Superintendent of Immanuel Schools. And what a great guy, and honestly a great friend. I've had the opportunity to spend 2 visits out at Immanuel Schools that included a lot of time with Ryan, spent a lot of time on the phone with Ryan, doing coaching calls with the leadership team in our work with Summit. And he just is exactly who he comes across to be. He is vulnerable, he is authentic, and he's a dad of 4 young adults. So he just seemed like the perfect guy to talk to about the stages of parenting, which I know all of us are always curious about. How do we navigate those stages and different times of parenting? So that's why we thought he'd be a great guy, and he does not disappoint.
No, he does not. And I got to listen in already, got the sneak peek, and he has just such a gracious approach to parenting. I loved that it wasn't this, I have it all figured out, just listen to me. Because I'm in the middle of the parenting mess. It's a good mess, right? But I'm in the middle of it. So sometimes when I start listening to parenting podcasts, I think, oh, I'm going to start hearing about all the things I'm doing wrong. But he has such a gentle way of talking about parenting, some practical tips, and just great takeaways for us. And really, no matter the stage of parenting that you're in. And what I found really interesting is your conversation with Ryan sounded a little bit like an echo of the conversation with Keith last month, and then the one I had with Rodney a few months before that.
Yeah.
Specifically regarding sports and the pressure that puts on family life and on worldview formation, and from all 3 people who are, quote, sports people and sports families.
Yeah. And who've never met each other and live in completely different sections of the country. Yeah, I saw that too as I was interviewing Ryan.
It was so fun. But let's go ahead and listen in, and we'll meet back here afterwards to talk a little bit about what you guys had to chat about.
Hi, Immanuel families. It's Julie Torres. Before we get to the interview, we wanted to remind you to join us for our annual open house celebration on Saturday, April 26th at 5:30 p.m. Visit your students' classrooms, enjoy a complimentary barbecue dinner, and check out the art show. There will be performances by our elementary and high school students and a message from Superintendent Ryan Wood, plus an alumni speaker. Solid Ground Coffee House will be open during the event, serving from their full menu. Make sure you stop by for a drink. We'll see you on April 26th.
Well, today's guest is no stranger to the Immanuel Schools family. It's, of course, Superintendent Ryan Wood. And we are here to talk today about a great topic, especially as we age as parents. Because when we age as parents, guess what? Our kids age too. And so we're going to talk about the stages of parenting. So welcome on board today, Ryan.
Hey, I'm excited. I'm very thankful for what you guys have been doing with the podcast, and just excited to share a little bit of wisdom I've learned over my failures, probably more than you.
Yeah, I know how that goes. So let's start right here. I do think most parents understand that parenting changes, throughout the growing up years. You got toddlers and then you got college students, and our approach needs to change. But tell us what you and Julie have found out about these main stages of parenting.
Yeah, I would say that probably the trap we started with was you kind of told to train them up all the same. And as I chat GBT'd those different age groups, you go from infancy, toddlerhood, you end up in adolescence. Boy, that's a fun time. But you can't parent them the same. And I think going through those different stages as our kids got older, we learned that there's some things you do the same, and there are definitely some things you do differently. Very valuable lesson.
So in general, how do you categorize when you have to shift? Is it, 0 to 2, 0 to 4, and then, elementary? What do you see?
I think it's a lot of the same up through elementary, but when you get into junior high school, I mean, that's just another whole world. Being in education for as long as I have, I see the junior high kids. You could pick them out of a crowd, but as a parent, I think things need to start transitioning in how you parent when your kids get to that adolescence age. Very important to understand what all the emotions and all the things they're dealing with just at school and maybe even in their church youth group. There's a lot going on, and I think you have to learn to transition at that point of the parenting stage.
Yeah, so you're talking about that key stage or transition time from kind of elementary into junior high. So as we think about these different stages, and we've just identified one transition stage from elementary to junior high, we recognize that the same approach that worked when our kids were in elementary school doesn't necessarily work in junior high. And I would say as we move into young adulthood, there's some changes there too. So what would you say are some of the differences between when our kids are younger and then as you've grown up, essentially you and Julie, right? We do that with our kids. What are some of the different ways that you approached your kids when you look at that big spectrum?
Yeah, the biggest thing for me is as my kids matured, I needed to treat them as if they've matured, right? I think the trap is you see them born and you parent as you're the parent, and there's a part of that that's absolutely spot on and correct. But as they mature, how we interact and how much freedom do we give them, and our conversations, they should change. I think of my kids now, and they're friends of mine. I'm still their
Yeah.
dad,
Yeah.
but I enjoy hanging out with my kids and being their friend. And I think there's that transition that happens over time from, hey, I'm the parent, do what I say, to, okay, here's a little more freedom and here's a little more opportunity to fail. And those
Yeah.
kind of things are key as a parent, learning them.
Remind us how old you and Julie's kids are.
So I have 25, 23, 20, I think 22 now, and 19. They're basically 2 years apart. It depends on what part of
Okay.
the year you're in.
Yeah, that's right. But you got to get it right because this is going on public record and they'll give you a
Yeah,
hard time if you don't get it right.
they
So
might.
you're talking a little bit about the golden age of parenting is where you really get to enjoy that kind of relationship with your kids. We talked a little bit about this in last month's podcast, actually, the idea of what happens if you treat your younger kids like friends? Like what does that look like?
I think it depends on the development of that friendship. I mean, my older ones obviously complain about Allison kind of gets everything, and
Is Allison the youngest?
she's the youngest, and she didn't
Yeah,
go through the
yeah.
struggles. But I mean, financially, I'm in a different spot, right? And career-wise, I'm in a different spot, and so that plays out in how that relationship looks with your kids. But I think at the same time, there's still things with Allison that we pressed upon her that we did with my oldest.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those are the things you have to kind of figure out as a parent. And individually in your family, the dynamics are different.
Yeah.
Different personalities, different talents, different gifts. And so, look, parenting's not easy, but I think the thing that, we've learned as we've gotten older is just adapting how we parent.
Yeah. One of the things you said I want to pick up on going from, I think this is how you said it, going from telling to more supporting and giving freedom. So how'd that work for you and Julie going from, okay, we are the authority, you have to do what mom and dad said, to, now we're going to let you kind of make some of those decisions on your own.
Yeah, we didn't do so good with our oldest.
Okay.
And that's probably very typical of parents. Your oldest, this is your first one that's out. I hate to say it this way, but representing the family. Where I work, my kids went to school, right? I was
Yeah.
early in my career. Probably didn't do a very good job of transitioning with her from the tell to the discuss.
Yeah.
As each kid came along, we feel like we got better at learning how to manage the tell versus, you know what, we're just going to let you fail on this one, and
Yeah. Yeah.
let's use that as a learning opportunity as well.
Yeah, I think that's so common for all of us because, and like you were saying, we're different people too. I mean, if you look at the time span of parenting, we've matured ideally. as parents. And so one of the things I'm hearing you kind of allude to is to not be too hard on ourselves as we reflect on where we think we did well and maybe where we think we didn't do so well. And I love that our kids, when they are growing up in a loving Christian environment, they're pretty resilient. And,
Hmm.
our firstborn, who has to pay some of the price of our learning of parenting, has hopefully a lot of mercy. I know it's fun for me seeing our adult kids that have children raising their kids to know and serve Christ. And it's like, okay, yeah, we made some mistakes, but God's grace is there.
Oh, 100%. And we're really close with my oldest daughter. She has the three kids. That's a different element. But watching her raise those little ones,
Mm,
it makes you kind of proud that, hey, some things were caught,
yeah,
and you kind of laugh when she's like, well, I wasn't going to do that because you made me do it, but then now I'm doing it as a parent. So
yeah,
there's
yeah,
some funny stories we definitely have throughout that process.
yeah. And I'd say it's even just encouraging for young parents to hear older parents just reflecting on the experiences and then really enjoying the fruit of parenting much later on. But thinking about pitfalls, what do you see as some of the common pitfalls that parents often fall into as they go through the stages?
I would say, being in education as long as I've been, what I'm seeing currently is we do not let our kids fail.
Hmm.
I think it's a little bit of a societal thing, and this is not every parent, but I think we aren't readily letting our kids fail to experience a failure of some kind, whether it's, they didn't turn in their homework assignment, so they got a B, and that gave them a B in the class. Like,
Yeah.
I think and encouraging is a great thing. I 100% agree with encouraging our kids, but there's this fine line between over encouraging and underselling the idea of failure is a great teaching tool.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a great teaching tool. And I think that's a pitfall that many of us get trapped in. And I see more and more of that today, too.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I've thought a lot about that. There's so many areas in life where we expect failure to be part of the learning process, like athletics, for instance.
Yeah.
I mean, who goes out there and throws a perfect touchdown pass the first time? Nobody does. You look at it in other domains. My background's in construction before I got into education and pastoral work. And I often realize or I reflect on the fact that my dad, who I learned from, allowed me to make a ton of mistakes and waste a lot of wood. But that was how I learned.
Yeah,
I often say everything I know how to do right in construction is because I did it wrong the first 5 times I
for
did it.
sure.
But somehow that doesn't translate over to our parenting. Why is it that we're so concerned with our kids getting A's or not failing? What is that?
I think it's a very simple, easy answer. We get trapped in the idea of we're going to be judged by the success and failure of
Mm,
our kids.
yeah,
And there's an element of that is a positive thing. I want my kids to be happy that they were a Wood. I want them to be
yeah,
confident enough that they could be the superintendent's kid and go to school there, right? And
yeah,
before that, I was the principal, and before
yeah,
that, I was a vice principal. I think the trap is we don't do a great job in the Christian community of showing the grace to the parents of the kids
yeah,
who fail.
yeah,
And you know, my oldest got off track for a while there,
yep,
and I had to grapple with that, and it was very humbling, and it was great. It was a great process for my wife and I to go through, to realize our love for her is more important than what people think of our parenting.
oh, that's so good.
But it's a legitimate trap, and I don't think there's a parent on this planet that would tell you, well, I just don't really care what anybody thinks about how I parented. I think they're lying.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of like the music teachers, they have concerts. Nobody else has concerts. The coaches do, I guess. They have concerts of sorts, but with us as parents, our kids are always out there as they are representing our name. They've got our name, and it can be so hard
Yes.
to say, man, I don't want to let them fail because I know that reflects on me. And that's I guess a convicting thing even for us as fellow parents to make sure that we have a ton of just long suffering patience with our fellow parents,
Yes.
to not pin everything on the parents' poor parenting when kids make mistakes. So that's really powerful.
I mean, it helped me in education too. I've gotten older and you get in administration, which isn't easy. It's helped you to look through a lens that you didn't really do a good job of looking through before you went through your struggles as a parent, as a dad, as a
Yeah.
mom. Um, it's very humbling. It's helped me, I think, to do my job better.
Yeah. 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 I would agree. That's a common pitfall, is not allowing our children the opportunity to learn from failure. So I really appreciate that. If we think kind of more maybe along this lines of pitfalls, how can parents stay super focused on what is the real purpose of parenting? And maybe I should ask you, from the Wood archives, what would you say is the purpose of Christian parenting?
You're, I mean, it's simple, really. You're teaching them to serve Christ and to further His kingdom, right? I mean, I don't think it gets any more simple than that. As a Christian, I want to raise faithful servants of Jesus who serve Him and further His kingdom. And there's a lot of pitfalls along the way, for sure.
Yeah. What were some of the things that, as you reflect, not to pat yourself and Julie on the back, but what were some of the things that you look back on that you purposefully chose to do or not to do in order to pursue that specific vision for your kids, being sold out for the kingdom?
So I'll give you one we did and one we didn't do. We did discuss all topics all the time at the dinner table.
Yeah.
I mean, having dinner as a family was very important to us. And so one of the things we didn't do is we didn't chase our tails pursuing every sports team, every performance. We limited, especially when they were younger, they could do one sport, and athletics was hugely important in our family, but we limited what they did. We wanted them to go out back and play and swim, and we wanted to go on vacations, and we wanted to do these things when they were younger. We knew when they got into junior high and mainly high school that was going to change, and for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But we limited their opportunity in playing everything and doing everything, which I think, looking back in hindsight, it's not a pat on the back, but I think it was wise. Definitely more my wife than me, but that was one. I mean, sitting down, having dinner together and talking about the day and talking about tough things was setting a biblical worldview for them. And they didn't know it.
Yeah.
And in the time, maybe I didn't even know it.
Yeah.
And then just not chasing our tails. And I see a lot of that today. It's a little bit concerning, what I see and how much these kids are just going from one thing to the next.
Right. And those two things, I'm glad you connected them, because you said yes to lots of time talking together. But to do that, you got to say no to other things. You can't say yes to everything and have that. And so I just want to affirm that too. And, as we've discussed before on the podcast, the Bible backs that up and research backs that up.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want a family that is deeply connected to what God's purposes are for our kids and around our family, part of that is, and having that Deuteronomy 6 influence, even when your kids go off to school, we recognize that. But the time that we do have at home needs to be so purposeful, and that requires us to say no to things. So I appreciate that you kind of connected those. If we had one of your 4 kids on the podcast with us today, what would they say were some of the distinctives of the Wood way?
If you're going to do something, which we limited, you do it 100%. And if you start it, you don't quit it. And I'm not saying that those things aren't happening today. I believe they are. But when you're in too many things, something suffers somewhere. And a lot of times it's church life and it's family life. And is it worth it?
Yeah, and that might be an interesting sideline for our discussion here, which is really central, so I shouldn't call it a sideline. What was your church involvement like with your kids? What did that look like?
Pretty much every week went to church. My kids were in the children's programs. My kids were in the youth until they were of the age that we felt they could choose. Do you want to go there? Do you want to go somewhere else?
Right.
It wasn't necessarily an option of not going. It was, here's where we go to church as a family. If you feel like you need to find another youth group to go to, then we encourage that.
Yeah.
But it was very much, a consistent thing in our home. And I didn't grow up in a Christian home, so that was like, I didn't meet the Lord till I was 19, and so
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
church I was playing sports on those Sundays, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so very much a regular thing for our family to be in church as much as possible, is pretty much weekly, and the kids were involved.
Yeah. And that even goes back to this idea of stages of parenting. It sounds like at a certain point, you gave control over one part of their decision. They had to be somewhere,
Hmm.
but you gave them options. And that's such a great example of beginning to kind of release them into adulthood, because that is a legitimate decision that a young person could make, in terms of which youth group to go to, where to get involved. But what you didn't say was, yeah, you don't have to go to church if you don't want. And I think that's a great example of kind of that transition towards young adulthood.
Well, even now we encourage them to go to church.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's not a, hey, church isn't something you need to do. Church is
Yeah.
something that you should desire to do. And I think by letting them choose that earlier on allowed them to kind of figure out what it is, style of worship. What is it they're looking at in a youth group? Um, maybe our home church wasn't the youth group they wanted to be in. And so you want them to desire to be a part of the local church and the
Yes.
church family. You don't
Yeah.
want to, there's a point where if you're forcing it, you're not really achieving what you're hoping to. You want them to desire when they're out in college to attend church.
And I appreciate again that, and I just want to emphasize this for parents, that you're talking about at a certain developmental and maturity level,
Yeah.
more and more freedom. You wouldn't say to your kindergartner, hey, do you want to go to church this week? Do you want to go to a different church? Like, so there's again, that idea of stages of parenting, and really keeping in mind that lots of control early and then gradual decrease of control over time.
Yeah.
And that just makes so much sense. When you think of your parenting journey, what were some of the things that really supported you and Julie as you struggled through how to be good parents through all the stages?
Honestly, the number one thing would be each other.
Yeah, that's so cool.
I have been a very big proponent of our relationship of husband and wife is the most important thing we can give to our kids outside of a knowledge of who Jesus is.
Yeah,
And so we were each other's support most of the time, not all the time. I mean, we had our disagreements like every other couple, but having a supportive wife, and hopefully I was supportive to her during this time of parenting when it was tough, that was the number one thing. Family, extended family was important. And for me, uniquely, the Immanuel community for us, this is where I've spent my whole parenting life, is at this school. Huge, huge encouragement, support, accountability. People I work with, people I trust, people that mentored me when I showed up here,
yeah.
At 22, not really knowing a whole lot about living godly in all aspects, And so just this community itself has been a huge support to us.
I love that. How can the average Emmanuel parent connect with the community at the school in such a way that it provides the same thing for them? Like, what can they do?
Be involved we probably have too many events, right?
Yeah.
But be involved in the events. Have those conversations with your kids on what's going on at school, because I know what's going on in school is a biblical. There's a worldview being pushed, a biblical worldview everywhere. I mean, this is why we brought you guys onto the campus, and get involved and embrace it, and it'll be life changing.
Yeah. What I love about that is you're not just saying, hey, parents, get busy with everything at school. You're saying, get involved with the purpose of connecting with a bigger picture vision and accountability and support for your parenting. And that often happens. What do you call it? PTF, or like, is there some parent association? Like, it happens at those meetings when you're sitting next to somebody. I can come to a meeting and say, yeah, I'm doing my time. I'm going to PTF, whatever. Or you can say, I get to go because I can connect with fellow Christian parents that have the same heart that I do. I would echo the same thing, Ryan. I mean, for Lori and I, the fellow parents that we were in relationship with through the education of our kids was such a huge support for us. So when parents stay away from those things, they're actually cutting off lifeline, not just to know what's going on at Immanuel, but to actually have friends that have the same heart and mission.
And even for us, we're a missional school, and so we have non-believing families, and we
Yeah.
we love those families like any other family. But being around Christians, salt and light,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
should bring flavor to what's going on this campus. And as parents, there's times where you just need other parents to be there to support you, and this is a great place to find them.
So thinking more about parents and connection with Immanuel, Immanuel has such a distinctive way of doing biblical worldview in every area of school life. I know you guys are so passionate about actually doing that and living it out. I've seen it in person on campus. So how can parents really partner with Immanuel in terms of shaping their kids' worldview, as opposed to just thinking Immanuel is going to do it all? Cool.
Yeah, I mean, the best way is for them to be in a local church as well, right? Like
Yeah.
the weekly interaction in a local church. I can't stress enough how important that is. If you're to just put that to the side and look at practically, when your kids come home, do you sit and talk with them about what happened at school? Because especially you think of those elementary age kids, they're just so naive and they're just it's all gonna come out. And I know for a fact every day there's something going to come out about the biblical worldview or what we learned from the Bible or Mr. or Mrs. They said this, and
Yeah.
you get that sense. I think just being involved in that conversation and hearing them out, maybe they're gaining things from it, maybe they're pouring more into that student in that conversation, but I don't think you can partner practically a better way than that. I
Yeah.
I mean, you can come to all the events and not pay attention to anything, right? But you sitting with your kids, having those discussions, encouraging that amongst your family and your kids, it's invaluable.
Yeah. And when you're saying that, to me, it does require parents to be attentive. And like I find it as a parent, when my kids were home, a month goes by like that. And you can look back and say, wow, did we do anything significant in the last month? So being attentive. But back to what you said, that you and Julie made a priority, dinner time. You made a priority of not running your kids ragged to everything. So what you're saying is create an environment where there's time and space, and then be intentional to ask them. And it also reminds me of how important it is to ask good questions, beyond how was your day, but ask even simple questions like, what were the top 3 things that happened today? Or what was the favorite thing that your teacher did or said today? And really engage in those conversations. So I really, really affirm that is such a great way.
And you guys addressed that in a previous podcast.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I forget what month, but you can go back and check it out, Immanuel Parents. If you didn't listen to that one, there was all about how to ask our kids
Yes.
really, really good questions. And my hope too is that, and this would be for Immanuel, for any other school, but as parents get more and more familiar with what the school is about, biblical worldview, what does this mean? How does that, where does that fit with chemistry and AP US history? Even the kids can actually help educate the parents about how to see all of life through a biblical worldview. So there's so much value from those kind of conversations. I love that. In closing, if you could just say, okay, Immanuel Parents, these are the most important things. If I had your ear, these are the things I would like to tell you about parenting. What would they be? Go.
Slow down. Enjoy parenting. I'm a grandpa now, and there are things as a grandpa that I wish I would have done as a parent. And it really stems around, as a parent, you're usually in your career, especially the men. I know we have a lot of stay-at-home moms. We have a lot of working moms. But either way, slow down and take in these years because they are precious. It sounds so corny, but I look at how I interact with my grandkids and go, I could just do this forever.
Yeah.
I wish I would have done more of this as a parent with my own kids. And they point it out to me. They don't let me slide by without. You're not even the same man you were as the parent compared to the grandparent. But yeah, enjoy these times because they do disappear.
Yeah. I think that's great advice for any parent, no matter what stage of parenting you're in. If you've got toddlers that are crawling on your leg, or teenagers that are driving you crazy for something, or young adults that you're trying to figure out, slow down and really savor those relational moments. That is such good wisdom. It's consistent with scripture too. I think back to Deuteronomy chapter 6, this idea of just being with our kids, living life together, savoring those moments. So this has been so fruitful. I really appreciate you taking the time, Ryan. And I just trust that the Emmanuel parents will say, hey, I know that guy a little bit better now. And that's why I love having my kids there, because that's what the focus is. So thank you for being with us on the show today.
Appreciate it. Appreciate you guys too.
Wow, I just found that so enjoyable. I mean, I feel like I got a chance to listen in on two people who are further along, who have so much wisdom to
Code word
impart.
for
I just want to like sit and just absorb it all. You know, I have one in high school, one in middle school, one that just started middle school. And of course I have one out of the house, but I still feel like I have so much to learn. I want to share a couple of my takeaways. One in particular was this idea of this trap that we can fall into because our parenting is on display, this trap that our kids are kind of these representations and maybe barometer of whether we've been a good parent or not. And I know we've talked about this in the past, the fear of judgment from others when our kids aren't doing right. But I really felt like the connection to sports, the connection to our kids' performance, all of those things tie back to that idea of the trap of what we think we want people or what we think people expect of us and what we want people to think about our parenting.
Yeah, I so appreciated Ryan focusing on not worrying about what other people think with our kids. And that just frees us so much. And I know that pressure too with my 5 kids as they were younger, particularly as they were younger. There was always this sense of how they behaved at church was a reflection on me, a direct reflection on me. It probably tells you how judgmental I can be of others when I see someone misbehaving, that I've had to work on in my life, and to really release others from that pressure, but also just us. And I really appreciated Ryan's humble approach to that.
Yeah, it was so good. And that's what I was kind of gleaning from you guys both, just that the humility there and the fact that you were offering some commentary on these very different stages of parenting, kind of like you get going, you get into a rhythm, and it's like, whoop, we're going to flip and we're going to adjust.
Yeah. Just when you think you're mastered one stage, boom, the next one comes up. Just when you think you got those elementary years nailed down, boom, you get a 6th grader.
Or a 7th grade boy, right? No. And there's that too. Like raising a girl sometimes is a different feel than raising boys interpersonally. The dynamic at home, the dynamic between mom and daughter is different than between mom and son or father and son versus father and
Yes.
daughter. And so I loved hearing the acknowledgement of those stages and even kind of when those stages flip. And I found myself afterwards reflecting and being like, I want to know more about those stages. Like, I want to know what's next. I want to know what I need to think about, how to work through some of these issues. I got a daughter that's about to drive. She's starting to think about her, future beyond high school. And as I was sitting and thinking about it, I was like, you know what I really need? I need more opportunities to glean from people who have walked through this
Yeah.
before me. And, sometimes we look for the perfect book, and there is no perfect book outside of the Bible, right? And it's going to
Well,
offer me some guidelines for my parenting, but there's a lot about wisdom and counsel in the book. And I felt like I was gleaning that from the conversation that you had with Ryan. And it just reminded me that I need to be intentional about seeking out relationships with my peers that have already walked through these parenting stages so that I can have somebody to process from and to learn from and to help remind me that it's going to be okay.
yeah, when Lori and I were raising our kids, we had friends that were of all different stages in the journey. Some we were like right in the trenches along with. Others we were in the trenches, but they had some older kids, so they had a little bit more wisdom, having walked a little bit ahead of us, even a couple years, even friendships with families who have kids that are just a couple years older than ours really made a huge difference in our raising of our kids, just by having someone to process with and laugh with and shed a few tears with. But yeah, I totally agree. And there's no substitute for that. No book at all. no parenting book, no parenting podcast or seminar is going to replace the life-on-life influence of fellow parents. Great observation.
Yeah, and that connection that you made to having parents that are at all different stages, those that are walking at the same stage that you are in, and then those that are ahead, that also reminds me of what you guys were talking about getting connected at Immanuel with parents who are also walking through and wrestling with these ideas. And then also, going into your church and finding those parents that have walked through it before and going up to them and asking them, like, hey, can I just talk to you about parenting?
Yeah. Yep.
And I honestly think that you'll have the right one because they'll probably say yes because they know how difficult it was, and then they'll probably say, "But, I wasn't perfect." And then you'll
I
be like, "I got it. I got the
and
right person."
I keep it. Yeah. So Maggie, I've got to give you this pro tip for parents who you want as mentors. So when Lori and I were first parents, little Heidi was just a little one. She was only about a year. So this is about 31 plus years ago. There was this couple in church that just had the greatest adult kids. I mean, they were high schoolers. They had 2 high schoolers and 2 out of school. And they were just like, we want our kids to be just like them. So we went up to them one Sunday morning at church, really just anxious to be mentored. We said, would you guys consider mentoring us on parenting? And they looked at us and said, no. We're like, what? How can you say no? They said, well, anything good in our kids is just by the grace of God. We really wouldn't have anything to share with you. And I was like crestfallen. And I was like, no, you must have something to share. But they refused. So here's a much better strategy than like cornering some older parents. Don't ask them to mentor you. Take them out for dinner and ask them questions. Make it less formal than, ooh, will you mentor me?
Very smart. Very smart. I definitely can appreciate that. Well, I want to just kind of circle back to Ryan's concluding remarks about just kind of slowing down, enjoying it, being intentional. And when I hear that, I don't know if it's my personality or if it's just my role as mom in the home, but I'm like, yeah, I've heard this slow down thing a whole lot. Like I've heard it since my kids were little. Slow down, slow down, slow down. And I am getting better in my age and as my kids mature, but I don't know that I always understood what that meant to slow down. But there were different moments throughout your conversation where there were some really practical tips. Can we just recap those tips, put it here right at the end so that everybody has them fresh in their memory?
Yeah. So I actually wrote down 6 things that Ryan said. First was talk at the dinner table. We've heard that so many times before in our podcast, how important it is just to have those conversations. So turn off the YouTube, turn off the news, put the phones away, actually have conversations at the dinner table. Number 2, be careful not to chase our tails outside of the home. And what he meant by that was don't be so overcommitted, even to good things. Don't be so overcommitted that you find yourself stressed and running too hard, too fast, too long. Number 3, make church involvement a priority. Every Sunday, now we know there's going to be a Sunday or here or there that we're not going to make it, but basically our family, the way the Erdvig family does it, the Wood family does it, the Pope family does it, we are part of a local fellowship and we are in church. So that's another way to slow down because that's the idea of Sabbath too, right? That you're not running on Sundays. Number 3, focus on the mom and dad modeling relationship, on how to have positive relationships. And that requires us to slow down too. I've heard Dallas Willard talked about the ruthless elimination of hurry and how hurry just saps the life out of relationships. And so just slow down and make sure even in your most fundamental relationship with your spouse, that you are talking, that you are sharing, that you're working to be on the same page, that you're taking the time to nurture that relationship. Number 5, wherever you are, have conversations. That kind of sounds like the first one, dinner table, but this extends it to the car, to the errands you're running. Sounds also a lot like Deuteronomy chapter 6 too, but just really focusing on conversations. And then the final one is to really be able to slow down. You have to slow down. And I know that sounds kind of idiosyncratic or it sounds like an oxymoron or a repetition, but really what it is have you ever been doing the dishes and just find yourself just doing them so fast, or you're cooking in the kitchen and you're just moving around, or you're doing yard work and you're just like on this beeline to get things done? take a breath, take a different pace of life to literally, even just for yourself as a parent, to just bring it down a few notches. And I'm talking slowly on purpose. And I think these 6 things put together, we'll jot them in the show notes too, are just a great way to practice a lifestyle of slowing down for the purpose of really cultivating really good parenting skills and practices, and ultimately fostering biblical worldview formation in our kids.
Well, that is so good. And I just really appreciate having that recap. And that slowing down is not just about the actual act of eliminating, but it's also about worldview formation. So we are just so grateful for Ryan and his vulnerability, just his willingness to share, to be a great mentor for parenting as well, and allowing us to get a glimpse into his experience and what he's done.
Yeah, and in next month's Made to More podcast, we are going to have a wonderful guest. Arlene Pelicane will be with us, and she's going to be talking about screen time and our kids, so you won't want to miss that one. So thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Made for More podcast is a production of Summit Ministries Center for Biblical Worldview Formation and Immanuel Schools. Immanuel exists to equip students to serve God and neighbor through mind, body, and soul, based on a Christ-centered foundation. Join us next month on Made for More.